In Nebraska, there are little dark fur rodents called deer mice. Their dark fur helps them blend in with the dark-colored soil, making them less visible to predators. There's one place, though, the Nebraska sandhills, where these rodents have light brown-colored fur. This happens because of natural selection. See, in the Nebraska sandhills, most of the soil is, as the name suggests, sand, and so the light brown fur is less visible than dark fur, allowing the lighter deer mice to hide better from the predators than the darker deer mice. But before we get into details, let's get some context. Natural selection is one of the main processes that result in evolution. But what is evolution, you ask? Well, evolution is a change in the gene pool of a population over several generations. Evolution can be divided into two types: microevolution, which happens on a small scale within a single population, and macroevolution, which happens on a scale that transcends the boundaries of a single species. Microevolution leads to macroevolution over long periods of time. There are 5 processes that result in microevolution: small population, non-random mating, mutation, gene flow, and natural selection. This last one is the only form of adaptive evolution, which means it's the only process that creates species better adapted to their environments. In simple terms, natural selection is a process where the most capable organisms are selected. They survive and thrive on the environment, reproduce, and pass on their characteristics to the next generation. This theory was made by our famous Charles Darwin and presented in The Origin of Species. Natural selection is a very simple mechanism that can be divided into 5 basic steps: variation, inheritance, selection, time, and adaptation. Variation is how organisms can vary in size, color, reflexes, and countless other traits. This diversity is often the result of random mutations that arise with each new individual. Inheritance is when organisms reproduce and pass on their DNA to their offspring. Since many traits are in the DNA, these will be passed on from generation to generation. Selection happens because populations tend to have more offspring than resources. Resources are limited, and more organisms are born than can survive. An organism with better traits would have more chances at survival, and, in turn, more chances to reproduce, preserving this way his special traits and passing it on to the next generation. Time, since from each generation, advantageous traits help individuals survive and thrive in their environment, and these traits are passed on to bigger and bigger numbers of offspring. After a certain number of generations, depending on the circumstances, these traits become common in the population. And so, the result of all this is a better adapted population to the environment than it was before. On the other hand, we have sexual selection. Sexual selection, or non-random mating, was defined by Darwin as a fight between individuals of a biological gender, usually males, for the possession or mating of individuals of another gender. This means that sexual selection is responsible for the evolution of characteristics that give organisms reproductive advantage. These are the secondary sexual characteristics, such as the elaborate tails of peacocks, bright plumage in birds, or large antlers in deer and antelopes. These traits, most times, possess no adaptive advantage in terms of survival, but this kind of selection is not in opposition to natural selection. In fact, they work together. There are 2 main types of sexual selection. In one kind, members of one sex compete for opportunities to mate, and the winners outreproduce the others. And in here, natural selection occurs if the characteristics that determine winning are inherited. In the other kind of sexual selection, members of one sex prefer some individuals with certain characteristics as mates. If the ones they preferred are genetically different from the others, then natural selection is occurring. In conclusion, natural and sexual selection are 2 big mechanisms of evolution. They help organisms adapt to their environment and remind us that the most important trait determining the evolution of a species is their reproductive output.